Right, it's 11 o'clock, so I think we're going to get going. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in today's session in collaboration with Conveyancing Data Services. My name is Danielle, and I am joined today by Tom, who is our technical communications exec, and he's actually a former mining consultant based down in Cornwall. A little bit of housekeeping before I get going. As always, we are recording today's session, so if you would like a copy of the slides and a copy of the recording, please reach out afterwards and we'll get that over to you shortly. You should see a control panel on your screen, which allows you to ask written questions. Please feel free to submit questions as we go along, and I'll get them answered either during or after the webinar. And just one final bit, which is at the very end, there is a feedback survey. Your feedback is exceptionally valuable to us. So if you could take a few seconds to answer those questions in the feedback survey, we'd really appreciate it. I am going to hand over to Tom now. So Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. So today we're going to be looking at mining in the cities. It's one of our Mining in the Cities webinars, specifically looking at London. It's not necessarily the first place people associate with mining, but plenty of us to talk about today. If we move a little further on into the slides. So we're going to start off with looking at kind of setting the scene as to the real demand for mining historically and also currently as well, because there's still very much demand for it. So if we look at the next slide, what we've got is an example of something that I imagine is either on all of your desks or in all of your pockets right now. So just looking at something as common as like an iPhone or a smartphone, these things typically actually contain around 2/3 of the periodic table in terms of metals and elements, which is staggering really for something so small. On the left there, you've got a list of some of the kind of key, most commonly recognized metals and minerals that make their way into the circuitry for an iPhone. Of course, that is a very small list out of the full one. But it just starts getting you thinking about really how much mining goes into our everyday lives. And a phrase that I was told once, which kind of really resonated, was that everything you see around you has either been grown or mined. And then when you start actually looking around your room and seeing what's on your desk and around your house, you realize actually, yeah, that's a fairly accurate representation. Of course, we have the demand for mining historically, which we'll touch on in a minute, but especially when we're trying to move and transition into this sort of greener, more sustainable, renewable world, we're increasingly seeing a demand for renewable energy infrastructure, things like solar panels and wind turbines. These sort of things all carry and have a need for metals to be extracted. Several tons of kind of copper and steel go into each single one of these wind turbines. So we still have a demand today, even for extracting these minerals. So if we look historically on the next slide, this one kind of helps put into perspective the demand for mining historically around the time of the Industrial Revolution, which was when it was really at its peak for extractive minerals in the UK, specifically around coal as well. This was a real high time for this. And if we consider the demands for mining by the mining industry itself, we know that there's a demand for the materials such as coal, and these help power foundries, which can in turn melt down metals and help produce steel. Steel is required to make the tools in order to mine the coal in the first place, and for things such as like the head frame, which is usually situated above like main mine shafts. If you've driven through certain mining areas or visited any kind of heritage attractions, you often see it looks like a sort of A-frame with some wheels and cabling above it. That's the headgear. It's usually above the main shafts. Coal is also needed to power pumping engines and indeed steam locomotives, so both used for either removing things such as water from the mines so that the miners could go deeper and extract more material, or the locos which are used to bring materials in and out of the mine. So whether that's reinforcing timbers into the mine, getting miners into the mine themselves, or then taking out the coal, the metals ever being mined. They'd use the steam locomotives for that. Bricks, these are obviously something that is paramount for just real construction of any buildings, but in this context, particularly things like the mine buildings and the foundries, and indeed miners' accommodation, cottages themselves. And what we have to create these bricks is something that we'll touch on later when we're looking at the mining specifically in London. So things like clays and shales, limestones, chalk. So chalk being a form of limestone, all get mined throughout quarries and brick fields. And these are, of course, used heavily in the construction of bricks. And so this cycle kind of just goes on and on and on. And this is just for the mining industry itself. We haven't even begun to consider other industrial uses for these raw materials yet. So there's such demand just in that itself. So we think about how these materials are extracted. On the next slide, what we've got is a sort of 3D schematic diagram of some of the key types of mining that we find in this country. Some of them you may have heard before, some of them maybe not. What we're going to do is focus on some of the ones that we're going to hear about later and that are more common in these sorts of areas. So we've got a surface working there at the top. This could also easily be representative of a quarry. So kind of like an open cast way of extracting materials where the overburden is stripped off, revealing the mineral or the material below, and then that can be quarried out at surface without the need necessarily for underground connections or going deep underground. These are something that I guess people are more common with because it's still used heavily today, just for like the removal of aggregates and things throughout the country. Certainly down here where I am in Cornwall, if you've ever visited us, you would have driven past on the only road in, past the Nostell, and there's massive quarries and waste tips all over the place. And so this sort of stepped down banked excavation into the ground is something that, yeah, most people have kind of seen or I've come across at some point. Then we've got a bell pit. So the things that we'll talk about later when it refers to chalk mining are typically things such as chalk wells, which of course, they actually aren't on this. They aren't on this diagram. However, the bell pit is similar in a few functions. So the similarities are that they would have a narrow shaft, enough for one person typically to kind of go down this shaft onto the material of the bed that they're working. So in this case, you've got this sort of black seam, this bed deposit that they're working. They would work out an excavation initially, typically obviously with the bell pits, they leave a sort of bell-shaped one. With the chalk wells, what we typically see is almost, it looks a bit like a beehive. So they excavate a hole beneath the ground and remove some chalk, and then they tend to drive little tiny tunnels in a really sporadic and random way out from the base of that. And then those get expanded into small little chambers. So you have little pockets of voids beneath the ground connected eventually to this one narrow shaft. Those were often rather unstable, as you can imagine. And so they would resurface when that happened, when it became a bit unstable, when they had got to the end of working that deposit, they'd go a few yards either side and sink another shaft and see what they would come down on. This is a really early primitive style of mining, so these tend to not really appear on much of the historic record. And then you've got pillar and stool mining, so sometimes called room and pillar. So this is where they would work out a bed of a mineral, and they would leave blocks of that mineral in place to support the overlying strata and the roof of the mine. So that's what you're looking there in that sort of cutaway cross section, those blocks. And that is an old method of mining initially when we first start to see the first pillar and stool workings. However, this is still used today. There's a method that works. It's been proven time and time again to work. And sure, in terms of safety precautions and the understanding of the movement of the ground has changed. So things have certainly been adapted in modern times, but the method is very much still the same. I had the privilege of actually visiting and operating limestone mine, which uses this method. And it's quite cool when you're in there actually to sit back and understand that this has been used for such a long time throughout history and still proves effective to this day. So if we move on now, specifically what we're going to look at is the geology in and around London. So on the next slide, what we're going to do is just having a look about specifically the London Basin. So where London sits is upon a geological formation known as the London Basin. There's a wide variety of different kind of rock groups and rock types and minerals that form it. But if you were to strip it down to its bare bones, you're looking at kind of three main formations. So the top layer is London clay. This is quite a well-renowned, famous clay, which creates the yellow bricks that you see on the right-hand side there, and the things that you see throughout London on some of the really kind of like nice ornate townhouses and some of the some more government buildings. You see these really nice yellow stock bricks. And so above that, below that, you then find a deposit of kind of sands, gravels, silts, that sort of makeup in the middle there. And then below that again, you're seeing the chalk. Now, the importance of the London Basin when it comes to mining in and around London is if you try to visualize that feature. So if you imagine like a basin shaped, like a sort of like a semicircle sink shaped sort of thing, in the center of London is where you've got the thickest deposits of clay, and then the sand and gravels with the chalk at the base. But as you get to the edges of the basin, all those overlying deposits that are above the chalk get shallower and shallower as the kind of basin is formed. And that's where the chalk is at the most shallowest point and where it begins to occasionally crop out at surface. So when we look at evidence for historic mining in and around London, what you're typically finding is on the outskirts of the London Basin is where you're finding chalk mines, because there's such less overlying geology for the miners to dig down and to actually extract before they got to the valuable chalk, which is really important when we move on later to having a look at where some of these mining endeavours and these subsidence issues have actually occurred throughout time. So if we go on now to the next slide, we're having a look at specifically the risks. And so next we have a sort of infographic, if you will, of London, looking at some of the key statistics in terms of non-coal mining there. And so of course, what we're showing there is that over 800,000 properties in Greater London could potentially be affected by these sorts of things. We have records of nearly 200 recorded mine shafts. These are the ones that have made it into the historical record. As I said, quite a lot of these you know, were early enough that they didn't actually make it onto the historical record. Certainly down here where I am in Cornwall, there's a kind of a little phrase that goes around that for every one recorded mine shaft in Cornwall, there's 5 that aren't. So this lesser an extent perhaps in London, but still something worth bearing in mind, the fact that the historical record, you're seeing the more well recorded features and not necessarily all of them. In terms of sinkholes, just shy of 400 sinkhole features there. And so you could start to get the picture that actually, whilst London isn't known as the most heavily mined area in the UK, and sure, stacked up against some of the kind of more industrialized mining areas, but actually there is still mining here that needs careful consideration, and that's something that we want to try and make sure isn't overlooked when people are purchasing property here. So if we move on now, what we're going to look at is what makes up that data, what has been mined here historically. And so what we know from geological data and from our own historic records, and with the help of things like the Ordnance Survey, the records show that there is chalk, there's some clays and sand and gravels here, which is no surprise really when we look back at what we considered, and the main deposit there is things like the London Basin. So these are going to be the things that make it up. So yeah, a few to tick in the stone section there. So now if we look at some case studies, this is one which some of you may be familiar with. It certainly hit the newspapers pretty hard when it all happened and when it came out. So this is looking at Pinnerwood School. So this area is one of those prime examples, really, of like an interwar metropolitan expansion. It was really fueled really by the introduction of the Metropolitan line, of the tube network, and really helped kind of build and boom this area. So if you go around, you've got a lot of just kind of everyday suburban living when you've got these beautiful Art Deco inspired houses, and you think actually perhaps this is a bit of an unlikely place that you would associate with mining, especially when you think mining is usually associated with maybe more rural areas. There's usually visual signs of it, like certainly down here you can't go for a walk 2 minutes without coming across an engine house or something, and that certainly isn't the case here. So it isn't the first place where people associate mining. However, the important thing to be aware of is it has this vast, thick chalk deposit, as it is situated on the outskirts of the London Basin, and this was heavily exploited during the 19th century and likely far earlier too. So it sits away from the deeper clay deposits found in the centre of London, which means that the chalk was very close to the surface compared to other areas. Miners therefore had a lot less trouble digging down to reach it, and all of the kind of shallowest perimeter of these little informal chalk mines all around this outskirts where this chalk was at its most shallowest is where these little informal chalk mines popped up. So one rather well documented mine, which admittedly is rare in these areas, is a mine known as Dingles. So this was owned by a local brickmaker, and chalk was taken out of the ground and added to clays and sands to stop the finished products that they were making in the brickyard, stop them from cracking, almost like an early additive, if you will. It proved really popular in this mine because it included things like vein deposits of something called Hertfordshire pudding stone. So this is a conglomerate rock including flint, which meant that the shafts that they were digging to work out these materials felt a little bit more robust compared to other areas where there was a lot more softer limestone. So if you've ever had a look and seen Hertfordshire pudding stone, it's one of those minerals that looks like it shouldn't exist naturally. It looks really, really pretty, and when sliced up and polished, it definitely looks something that has been man-made, but it's one of those fantastic, just natural occurrences that we can't really, it just looks great. So much of the area that was excavated for Dingles is now built over, with parts of the shaft system currently underneath a sports field, allotments, and the aptly named Dingles Wood. So the chalk here has been worked by a variety of methods, from kind of those primitive, isolated, sporadic chalk wells, which you mentioned before, to later, more extensive subsurface tunneling. And the kind of creation off those of these multiple underground galleries, very few of which were really known about or recorded until it was too late. And it is the galleries that have caused these well-documented property damage. In 2017, one of the shafts collapsed within the grounds of Pinnerwood School. This forced it really to be evacuated, whilst a nice detailed investigation was launched into the cause of the collapse. And that's what you can see as those sort of red and white blobs underneath the school there. That makes up part of the later image survey. This was these previously uncharted and unknown tunnels, really, which stretched beneath the school buildings. And the surveys showed that actually the mine's roof had collapsed in certain places. Because of this, the school was declared unsafe, and it was in around 9 months, really, before pupils and staff could even return to classrooms. And this was after the tunnels had been surveyed and professionally infilled. So this goes to show that mining can really affect the most unlikely of places. Not only is it not what people would associate with a mining area, but also beneath a school, which is, again, people just don't expect it to happen like that until it does. So moving on to our next case study. This is an area in Plumstead called Brickfield Cottages and has very similar geological conditions to Pinner. So again, areas like this, Blackheath, Chislehurst, Plumstead, they all sit on the edge of this huge chalk outcrop beneath the surface gravels. And like Pinner, it made it a prime example for early chalk miners to exploit this commodity. So in 2016, we got a chance to see firsthand how these chalk mines can impact property today. even recently developed new properties. And this is something that I used to get asked quite a lot when I was a mining consultant was, well, it's a brand new build, you know, there's not going to be any mining risk here. And whilst more often than not, that certainly is the case, or when I say certainly is the case, if there was any risk, it should have been addressed, especially with modern day developments. There's a lot more process and procedures to go through, so it is more likely that these things would have been addressed. There's a lot more legislation in line. But we know from things like this incident that that isn't always the case. So this all came to light following a collapse outside two newly constructed properties at Brickfield Cottages. Neighbouring properties within the development were also evacuated, and the whole area was deemed unsafe until an investigation was completed. The incident hit the local press with lots of locals getting very angry and also confused as to how this could even be allowed to happen, especially given the fact that the properties were so recently constructed. So in an area where we have a known history of extensive mining and quarrying, you would think that the developers should have really accounted for the potential risk from historic mining activity and the possibility of ground subsidence really as part of the site appraisal. And we do know that a certain level of investigation was done, but arguably from the aftermath of this, perhaps more should have or could have been done in the first place. The clue, of course, is in the name of the development, Brickfield Cottages. So it was obviously aware of the historic use of the land. And by looking at nearby historical mining data, it's clear that the area has been heavily worked for a variety of rock types, really, and especially for brick production. We've got there a brickworks, and you can see these sort of dashed lines there that are delineating the face of a quarry. So brickfields, these were things that were common in the 18th and 19th century, and typically any topsoil, this was removed by hand, which helped expose the much sought after clay deposits found below. These clays were then extracted and were commonly mixed with chalk to form bricks, and so consequently, close to former brickfields, you would also usually find evidence of chalk mining. But this is at a time where mining wasn't recorded awfully well, and as far back as 1865, we have the Ordnance Survey recording brickworks in the area, but little evidence showing the full extent of the extraction. However, by 1894, it's clear that the works have expanded, and our historical maps clearly show signs of quarrying directly upon which would become the development area. In the 1896 edition, we see that extraction has expanded again. So this time, further east towards the area that will become known for its large underground chalk mine. And this mine lies less than 100 meters east of the development area and has been responsible for a number of settlement and subsidence events taking place throughout history. It includes a network of tunnels and galleries, as well as a number of shafts sunk down through the topsoil into the chalk below. So unlike Pinnerwood School, the issues of Brickfield Cottages arguably could have been avoided, as the records clearly show a potential risk here. So it begs the question, why was it missed? And also, it just goes to show that it's really, really important to have these sort of things assessed as early on in the transaction phase as possible. So looking at the data now, this should help, I hope, explain a little bit as to why, where kind of the consultants come in and the skills that they can provide. So if we go on to the next slide, prior to the 19th century, we know that mining really remained largely unrecorded. In 1840, we had the first mining record office. It was established in London. It wasn't until 1872 that a legal act came into action, and this made it a requirement to deposit an abandonment plan within 3 months of your date of leaving a mine. So prior to this, in 1850, you did have to produce a plan of your workings, but you didn't have to put them anywhere. So they ended up lots in private collections, in people's sheds, lofts, lost. Who knows? There is a whole host of maps which didn't make its way formally into any sort of record. And I suppose the other thing to point out is these plans weren't put together to help aid the conveyancing process. They were very much put together to help ensure safety of miners, especially after a number of mining disasters where they've come across previously worked workings which caused hazards and sadly caused a lot of people to lose their lives. So from about the 1880s, right up until really the privatization of the Coal Authority in 1994. Plans, both coal and non-coal, kind of shifted all over the country. They were moved from here to there and put in various different archives. They were split up, they were repatriated together. Certainly through the war, when lots of our archives were targeted by air raids and such, we lost a lot of them. And so it's important just to understand that actually we begin with a historical record that wasn't complete because people didn't necessarily put them anywhere. And then throughout time, they've just been moved from place to place, and some have been destroyed, some have been damaged, some have had tea spilt on them, some have been ripped, torn. I've come across some in the archives with blood stains on them, so goodness knows what happened there. But it tells us that the records that we consider can be incomplete at times, and it's one of the things that the consultants have to take into consideration, and then use the other tools that we have to our advantage, things like the Ordnance Survey mapping schemes, geological mapping from BGS, as well as some of the more modern data applications like LiDAR and satellite movement. And by using all those things together, we can help paint a really good picture of what is beneath the ground historically. So a little bit about our consultants on the next slide. Our consultancy team, the mining team down in Cornwall, which I used to be a part of, they're made up of historians, geologists, geographers, mining specialists, archaeologists like myself. So they each bring their own little thing to the team, which helps us greatly kind of just make sure that we have all bases covered. So prior to the acquisition from Groundsure in 2020, we were known as Mining Searchers UK, and from that we'd been interpreting, investigating and securing mining since 1978. So we bring that experience now into Groundsure. Not only that, but by working with Groundsure, we've got so much more access to kind of data, and also the team of consultants that they have. And so since the acquisition, when we're now one, really our level of kind of understanding and interpretation has really helped us develop and to be able to provide better assessments to our customers. And so now looking at the mining and stability risk model, this is a tool that Groundsure has developed over many years within its mining stability reports. And this has kind of been developed and redefined, certainly using kind of our 40 years of reporting and investigating. And it includes a lot of proprietary and third-party data to ensure a really comprehensive assessment is provided for each property. And so what we've done is we have risk ranked each individual mining feature and data point, because we know that each mining feature is unique and we can't just blanket risk every mining feature. We take into account if we have things like the recorded size, the local geology and overlying strata, whether there has been any potential securing works, and the likely date and age of the feature. And this can help us really work out kind of if there is any potential risk from that feature, and if there is, the sort of area at surface that that feature may affect should there be any movement. So that's what we call our zone of influence. So this, combined with our knowledge, our investigation reports, and all of our additional information, has meant that we're really able to hone in and accurately assess the mining and stability risk posed to each individual property on a case-by-case basis. So that is the kind of end of my section. I'm going to hand back now to Danny, who's going to take you through a few of the report options. And I hope that was really useful, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Tom. Don't worry, everyone, I'll make it quick. But just to kind of back up or touch on what Tom talked about in terms of the amount of data that we use and sort of all of the different data points that we have, and the team have painstakingly kind of assessed and risk ranked. One thing to also note, which you may or may not know, is that when we have these things called mining alerts, which we generally either tend to integrate with your search provider system and whatnot. And what we do in that respect is, even before you've placed an order, if a search is being placed for a property, we will look at what the risks are from a mining perspective in and around that property in relation to that property based on the information, the data that we have. That includes all of the unique third-party data and some of that proprietary data that we have. And so what we're trying to do, even before you place a report, an order for a report, is actually tell you whether or not you do or don't need a mining report to begin with. So we try as much as possible, when we say, hey, there's a mining risk to your property, there genuinely will be something of something well worth knowing its presence in and around the property. So we don't really like flagging a risk up without actually making sure that there really is one to the property. So in terms of reports and what the report options are, that really depends on how you work and the due diligence that you have, due diligence requirements that you have. In terms of options, I would say the most comprehensive, the quote unquote easiest option would be the Groundsure Vista from a residential perspective, because it is basically a full comprehensive environmental report as well as a full mining report. And when I say mining, we do cover both non-coal mining as well as coal. That is covered when appropriate. So obviously, if you aren't in a coal mining area, then we won't put in a Con 29M. But if you are in a coal area, that'll get put in. Same with the Cheshire Salt Search if you happen to work in or around Cheshire. I know we're talking about London specifically, but of course you will probably do transactions in and around London as well as outside of London. And then we also take into account, of course, other types of ground stability, so natural ground stability risk, all of the non-coal mining risk that Tom has talked about today, along with all of the other environmental reports. So in this case, the most beneficial aspect of something like an Avista is you get one report. You only have to look at one report. You don't have to buy anything else. Everything is all there. And it's very, very helpful when we're talking about time savings, because we all know that everybody's short on time. Now, the Avista is out of all of the reports that we provide, is the most comprehensive in terms of coal mining and ground stability. So we cover everything that Tom's talked about in terms of non-coal, all of the minerals that were on that table that he showed you earlier. We cover, of course, coal, we cover Cheshire salt, and then we also cover coastal erosion and natural ground stability. And I'm just going to touch on this quickly as well, because it is also quite important when we're talking about ground stability in general. We have something called the BGS GeoSure. We've got BGS shrink swell assessment and SatSense, so ground movement in terms of satellite monitoring, and then coastal erosion. I think, if anything, the most pertinent thing, certainly in and around the London area, will be the BGS shrink swell, because that's really tied to areas where there's a lot of clay, which of course London is. So the BGS shrink swell assessment is a property shrink swell hazard score, and it's property specific, and it gives you an indication of susceptibility to that kind of subsidence given the underlying geological property of the area. We also take into account things like the proximity of trees and the characteristics of local buildings. So with London being very clay rich, anything that is a clay rich soil and rock, they all have the ability to shrink and swell with the changes in moisture content. So when it rains, the ground expands. When it dries up, the ground contracts. And given the past year that we've had in terms of heat and then rain, places like London will also be susceptible to that type of movement as well. We've talked about non-coal mining. I'm not really going to go into detail about coal, but all of this is covered, and it's very, very comprehensive. And one final thing to touch on is climate. It's just a new thing we've added to some of our reports. We've also decided to add climate data into some reports, and this is a new feature which is basically presented as a guide for any potential climate change impacts, and it enables the report to be compliant, ready in advance of future climate change practice notes, which we know is coming, I believe, in February of next year. The Law Society will be releasing a new climate change practice note next year. So in terms of the easiest report would be the Vista, but should you want, let's say, a standalone report, So you want to buy your Enviro separately and then tack on a separate standalone mining report later, you can also do that. You have the option of either purchasing a geo-risk report, which covers all of the non-coal that Tom's talked about, plus the ground stability. And then if you want to have coal as well as non-coal, you have a report called GeoRisk Plus. So there are standalone options for you should you want them, and you would rather have them as a separate thing. I suggest speaking to your account manager at your search provider, because they can set up packs for you either with an Avista in it, or set up a pack with the standalone report separately if that's how you want to do that. It really depends on what you want and what what your requirements are. And just a final point, really the most kind of important thing is you've got the wonderful team down in Cornwall. We've got wonderful mining consultants which you can speak to directly. So the one thing we would say is you aren't experts at this. We don't expect you to be experts at this. So should you ever get one of our reports and you have questions, you can pick up the phone and speak to one of the mining team or one of our environmental consultants. Or if your client has lots of questions and is making you rip your hair out a little bit, you can get them to speak to us as well. And that's kind of what we're here for. We are the experts when it comes to these issues. So please do take advantage of the support that we provide. It is part of our normal service. We don't charge for it. So in that respect, we always want to make sure that you're fully supported. And that is pretty much it from us. I hope you found today's session helpful. If you'd like a copy of the report, any sample reports, if you'd like a copy of the recording of the slides, let us know and we'll send that over to you. And have a great rest of the afternoon. And yeah, we'll be getting in touch soon. Feedback survey will be launching just after this. So have a great rest of the day.